From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, syndicating across the country on the Business Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio, WYBC.com, and 1490 AM WGCH, Greenwich, Connecticut. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. Anybody can have a bad century. The curse of the Chicago Cubs, 108 years without a championship until last year, and then a powerfully honest interview with former Major League Baseball great Darryl Strawberry on addiction. The Cubs beat the curse, and Strawberry beats the curse of drugs tonight on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. First up, Rich Cohen's a fellow transplanted Chicagoan. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller Monsters, the 1985 Chicago Bears and the Wild Heart of Football, for which he was a guest on our show. He's a contributing editor at Vanity Fair magazine. His new book just out in time for the baseball players and maybe another cup run by the Cubbies, The Chicago Cubs, The Story of the Curse.
Well hit, deep to right, back, high! It's all over! Willie Smith just homered! The Cubs win the game!
All right, welcome, Rich. Good to have you back.
Glad to be back.
So I got to tell you, this is how sick I am about the Cubbies. But my mother passed away in 2010, and one of the first things I thought about was that she lived her entire life without a Cub championship.
Right.
It seems kind of
yeah.
And
I had this realization when I realized that there was nobody alive on Earth probably who'd been alive when the Cubs last won a championship, because you'd have to be like 108 years old. I mean, there might have been somebody in Siberia eating only yogurt, I guess, but they probably wouldn't care about the Cubs.
I have to say, though, that my grandson was born in 2016, so he didn't have to wait. But as we get off, your dad, you quote, is, Cub fans will have a diminished life determined by low expectations.
Right.
There's the GOAT, there's the Black Cat in 69, there's low expectations. Was there a curse? Tell us about it.
There was a curse, except, we don't really believe in an actual metaphysical curse, but, William Cianis put the Billy Goat Tavern showed up at the game in 45, the World Series game, with his goat and was kicked out of this park by Phil Wrigley himself. And he put the curse, he said, not until the goat is treated right will the Cubs ever win another championship. Then the goat, Murphy, died. So you're in big trouble. And the idea of a curse, I've come to believe, really took hold after 69, because you couldn't look at the Cubs without thinking something greater was at play. There was some metaphysical force field around a championship that as they got closer to it, they slowed down, And I think it was real in that it became a mindset. It became almost a block. It became kind of a bad culture that you had to kind of fix the culture. And the problem was it was like a disease that would pass from generation to generation. The older players would spread it to the younger players. And when things would get tough, they would sort of hug this idea of, well, of course, we're cursed. And though they didn't really believe it, it became something that was self-fulfilling. And you'd see it in crazy ways, like the famous Bartman game where, this thing happened that's not such a big deal, which is a fan reached out and hit a ball. It happens all the time. And suddenly it became super dramatic, and the team fell apart. And they didn't blame the players who fell apart. They blamed the poor fan, And that was just a curse on live TV.
Let's talk about, it's in the book, you really dissect this in more technical reasons if I can. Number one, P.K. Wrigley, and you make this point that owner has to really care and have the pride about winning, right, not just making money.
Owning a sports team is basically a stupid business.
Yeah.
So, and you're only going to be doing it if you love doing it and if you really, really, really want to win. And the Cubs were owned by William Wrigley, the guy who, with the chewing gum, who really wanted to win. And they did win, and his son took over, and his son basically didn't like baseball, wasn't very shy about saying it. When asked what his favorite sport was, said shooting craps. So it doesn't take a tremendous amount of physical endurance. Basically, he said, we're not spending any money, that chewing gum money on baseball. And he made this sort of Faustian bargain where he said, we're not going to give people a great baseball team, so we got to give them another reason to come out to the park. We'll give them Wrigley Field. We'll give them this great experience at the park. And he sort of traded beauty for excellence. And I just remember running into a friend of mine on Michigan Avenue. We were talking about Yankee Stadium. He said, Yankee Stadium is so ugly, Wrigley Field's so beautiful. I have this realization that Yankee Stadium might be unsightly, but all that winning has made it beautiful. And in Wrigley Field is beautiful, but all that losing had kind of made it unsightly, was how I felt about it around the year 2000.
And, you start to see the PK Wrigley in that era. They had no farm system. They didn't bring in quality veterans. So there's technical reasons as well. Now, what about the age-old, they only played day games for so long. The heat beat them up. And that Wrigley Field, which is interesting, it's described as a schizophrenic, field built on whether the wind's coming in or going out. You can't build around
right.
around it.
Well, it is. There is, I interviewed Andy MacPhail, who was general manager of the Cubs, and I asked him, why can't the Cubs win? And he said, well, it's Wrigley Field. And the reason is because, like you said, it's schizophrenic in that when the wind blows in, it's a pitcher's park. When the wind blows out, it's a hitter's park. And you can't build to it like you build a team for Fenway Park with the big green monster, or you build a team for Yankee Stadium with the short porch, or even where MacPhail had been, which had been the Metrodome in Minnesota. So you kind of needed a team, as Theo Epstein once said, that could win 14-13 or 1-0. And that's kind of like an all-star team, which is kind of what they built. And I had this radical solution about 8 years ago that they should tear down Wrigley Field and salt the fields where it had been so nothing would ever grow there again. And that was probably the most unpopular thing I'd ever written. And I was getting viciously attacked, and I was sort of half kidding but half serious. And then Kerry Wood retired right then, and they said, why can't the Cubs win? And he said, it's Wrigley Field, and all the attacking stopped because there's a truth to it. And that was the point. And actually, I think that, when they did the renovation of Wrigley Field, my theory was always, man, they read my story and they followed it because they put those big scoreboards up that sort of knocked down and tamed the wind. Sort of say Wrigley Field is still schizophrenic, but now it's on lithium.
Do you believe the day game thing? The last team to keep day games was something?
Yeah, I do believe the day game thing, but so that's interesting too. Which is I always thought, okay, so it's all the day games and the fact that 69, right. Ferguson Jenkins is out there 5-7 times in August for 9 innings. So when September rolls around, he's got nothing left. And now looking at it as an older person with a little more knowledge of the world, the real problem with the day games wasn't that so much. I mean, that was some degree. The real problem is that it left those guys free all night. Normally you finish your baseball game 10, 11 o'clock. You got to go home, go to sleep the next day. You're getting on a plane or whatever. The Cubs would be finished at 5 o'clock. They'd go walk right across, Waveland Avenue, go into a bar and drink all night.
Okay, so let's talk now. How did Theo break it? I happened to go to Yale graduation where he spoke, and he talked about it. Basically came down to people. The team meeting that in the World Series was people. Talk about his components in architecture to beat the curse.
If the curse was real to some extent, and I believe it was, it's a culture, and it was passed from player to player. And the way you had to beat the curse is you had to change the culture, and to change the culture, you had to change the whole mentality of the players. And you had to do that by getting rid of people. And the first thing he did, it's kind of a good lesson for business, which is he basically got rid of all the veterans of the team. Okay, and then he brought in sort of players that were just placeholders. I'm sure they didn't know that about themselves. Well, he built a new team in the minor leagues. Yeah. And in the past, they would bring guys up who were good, like Ryan Sandberg, but you'd put them on teams with guys who had the curse, and they sort of told the stories, and the thing was the culture of it was passed down. Epstein solved that by, first of all, having a very young team, and because when you're young, you're stupid. You're too stupid to know about history, so you don't even know about the curse. And you're so stupid, you're kind of brave and free. And bringing them up all at once, like building this team, growing it like in a greenhouse, and then transferring it into Wrigley Field. And not literally all on the same day, but within 2 years, all those guys came up. And they needed a couple veterans, and they brought them in from other organizations where they had won. And that's really how he did it. So you had a totally different mentality and players for whom being a Cub meant something different. It meant excellence.
Does he have a personality? Where does he get the ability to build a team that he knew was going to suck for 3 to 5 years and be able to sell that and live with it?
Well, I interviewed him, and he said that's the first thing he said when Ricketts wanted to hire him was, are you prepared basically to not be able to go out to dinner in this town? Because this team's going to have to get so bad to be good. And for me, of course, a horrible moment for me is when the Marlins won the World Series in, I forget what year, but just right at, within 3 years of their existence. And I thought, how is it that an expansion team can basically win the World Series and the Cubs can't. Well, it turns out it's easier because the Cubs are sort of bogged down and burdened by their history. Theo kind of turned the Cubs into an expansion team. And I just think he had this idea from Boston and from Chicago that they had to almost wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And Dallas Green said something similar when he took over. And he almost did it, but he didn't really go all the way. And Theo Epstein said an interesting thing to me, which is he said one of the reasons he thinks in the recent history why they couldn't win is because WGN basically was broadcasting that team and owning the team. And they had to have a team that was always good enough that people would watch it on TV. And that meant never letting the team get truly bad in order for them to get good.
Interesting. All right, we'll be back with some more Cubs history. Stay with us. We're back with the author of the Chicago Cubs Story of a Curse, Rich Cohen. Theo also did some unconventional stuff, which I found was interesting. He did not build around pitchers, per se, like the Mets have and did. And the Mets got to the World Series first, but this year's been a disaster because of pitching injuries. Something called neuroscanning. Right. And the manager, Joe Madden, was unconventional. Talk about the unconventional components.
Well, my father's a hardcore old-time baseball fan, and I grew up with the conventional wisdom, which is baseball is like 90% pitching.
Right.
And what the Cubs did was completely counterintuitive, which is they spent all their time, attention, and money on mostly position players. And I asked Theo about that, and he basically said, well, I disagree with your father, which is shocking. Okay, so he said, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's logical, but you don't think logically. You think by what you've already thought before, which is what is baseball? It's very simple about it. It's half of it is getting runs, and half of it is preventing the other team from getting runs on you. And what percentage of getting runs are your position players? 100%. And what percentage of preventing runs are your pitchers? They're not 100%. The defense is some percent, and those are your position players. And he said, I would say it's about 15% of that defense is the position players in the field. And if you watch the Cubs, that's true because there's many plays where you see, Jason Hayward make a catch that would have been a double or a triple, or Javier Baez make a play you've never seen before at second base. And he said, so basically he thinks it's 65% position players. And the position players are more important because they play every day, so they give the team its personality more than the pitchers who play like once every 5 days. And then finally, and most importantly, and if you're a Mets fan, you know about this, he said pitchers get hurt, and you build this team around these young arms, and they're not there. The Cubs have this incredible redundancy where they seem to have too many players. They have like 6 outfielders. And I asked him about that. He's like, well, that gives us incredible flexibility to put a different lineup on the field every night depending on the pitcher and where the ball is going to be hit based on the pitcher. And then also, guys get hurt, and it's not a giant setback. And you saw that in 2016 when Kyle Schwarber, right at the beginning of the year, like the second game, was gone for the whole season. The Cubs didn't miss a beat because they had Ben Zobrist, who was a second baseman who could easily play left field. It's almost like so simple, his thinking, that it's counterintuitive. And then they're really, back to the Moneyball thing, they're looking at players who are going to win games, not that necessarily look like great players. So he told me about this thing they use where they study the neural pathways in the brain of what makes a great hitter, and they look for young prospects that have the same kind of makeup of the way their brain processes information. And he told me about a video game where it simulates a ball coming in at 100 miles an hour, and you've got to basically press a space bar right when the ball is crossing home plate, unless the ball, as it crosses home plate, turns to a different color. Then you don't press a space bar, which is your speed of reacting and your ability to change your actions when the information changes. And he said, we know that the best hitters in baseball can do that. And he said that's how they got Mookie Betts for the Red Sox. That's how they identified him. And that's how they're identifying players. It's almost like, NASA type stuff.
Joe Madden now.
Joe Madden he'd interviewed, to be a manager with the Red Sox. And Joe Madden is a completely unconventional manager and great for a young baseball team. It's almost like I think he's like a young father with new kids, like he's having fun himself. And he has a very forgiving kind of way and a very experimental way. So the Cubs would do crazy things like the famous left field game where, in baseball, a problem is you have a left-handed pitcher, you have a right-handed pitcher. You want to use one, but then you lose him for the rest of the game because you got to take him out of the lineup. Madden had this famous game in 2016 where he put a left-handed pitcher in left field and had a right-handed pitcher pitching, and he would just have one go back to outfield and the other come in and pitch and swap them that way. Now, that's what you do if you're a coach of a softball team, and there's that real kind of fun. And also the idea of this Cubs team is like, everything seems so specialized in pro sports. You look for a second baseman, you look for an infielder, you look for a pitcher. You really got the feeling that with the Cubs, they looked for the best athlete and then figured out later where they'd use them. That's how you'd sort of put together a team on the playground. Let me give you the best guy and he can play anywhere.
Interesting. And it's how really football does it too. You notice that's how the NFL teams build best talent. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I did the Bears book, there a great line from one of the guys who put together the team, which said, sort of you can look for these guys who can jump the highest or run the fastest, or we would just look for football players. So you'd get a quarterback like Jim McMahon who was kind of short, didn't have a great arm, but would win all the time.
He changed the culture.
Yeah, you see that with the guys on the Cubs. And Madden was just a really good manager for young players because the idea is young players tend to, and you see this with the Cubs still, they're streaky. They haven't learned the tricks yet of how to get out of dead place or a bad stretch. And they kind of feed on each other. So when one stops hitting, they'd all stop hitting. And that's why they got a guy like Ben Zobrist, who was older, who could come in and be a guy who could get out of that hole.
While we're on that, talk about the three types of managers, the aspirin, the penicillin, the chemo, the Parcells type of guy. It came when you were talking about Leo DeRocher, but it's interesting.
Yeah, well, it was actually something told me by Doug Plank, who played for the Chicago Bears, which he said there's, three kind of coaches. There's the aspirin coach who, he says great stuff and he's going to do this, that, but nothing changes, comes in, doesn't change anything. Then there's the penicillin coach, and he comes in, he's amazing. He fixes everything except the one thing which he can't fix, and that's cancer. And he goes, well, what do you need? And he goes, what's cancer? He goes, cancer on a team is stuff like the curse, or it's like guys don't try. Dead wood, guys playing for paychecks. Yeah. For that, you need the chemo coach. And the chemo coach just comes in, and by his appearance and his manner, he's so tough. It's a new sheriff in town. You're going to, fix yourself or you're gone, and he doesn't care who you are. And that is Leo DeRocher. He was talking about Mike Ditka.
Yeah.
He said the problem with the chemo coach is that after he's killed cancer, he keeps using the chemo.
And he kills everybody.
He kills all the healthy tissue. Because he's got a chemo machine, and that's all he does. And if you were a Bears fan in the 80s, you saw that that's what Ditka did. He never laid off. And that's what Madden's great at, which is those young guys didn't have cancer on that team. They were a great young team, and they needed a manager who was going to not panic, not freak out, not sort of say everything depends on what we do tonight, and had this kind of perspective you want. And to me, if you read about the old Cubs, they had a manager, Joe McCarthy, who became manager of the Yankees. And there was a famous game where Hack Wilson made 3 errors in one inning, and the press was all over him. And I always think this is just like Madden. Joe McCarthy said, hey, he lost the ball in the sun. He didn't put the sun up there. And you compare that to a guy like Leo DeRocher, who when the Cubs outfielder made an error in 1969, said basically my 4-year-old could have made those catches. And he said it to the press, and it destroyed the guy.
And as we go out of this segment, we look at the futility. From 1947 to 1966, they never finished above 5th place. They lost 90 to 100 games, 3 years. From 60 to 66, there were 10 teams in the league. They finished 7th, 7th, 9th, 7th, 8th, 8th, 10th. From 46 to 83, never made the playoffs. In a couple of sentences, how did the fans survive?
They just have to find what they basically do is they turn losing into a religion. And they make losing noble and more righteous. And they sort of say, if I'm a Cubs fan, I'm holier than you because my kingdom is not of this world. I'm going to get my World Series in the next world. And that's the culture that I grew up with. The idea that we were better because loss had made us more pure and more righteous. And that's the thing that we have to give up now, and that's the thing that Red Sox fans had to give up.
And in the next segment, we'll talk Ferris Bueller going to Wrigley.
There's a drive, way back, might be, Cubs win, Green hits a home run into the right field bleachers. Holy cow.
Our guest, Rich Cohen, he's dissected the Cubs curse in a new book. And I want to start off with the Ferris Bueller component. You started going to games by yourself and sitting in the bleachers at age 13, and your teachers didn't seem to mind?
Well, they didn't mind when I went to the playoffs in '84 because that was so unusual. My joke is you didn't even have to show a note. If you just showed a ticket stub, they said, okay, you're excused. And it was really, I've always associated Wrigley Field with kind of freedom because it was the first place you could go somewhere on your own, have an experience. And, of course, we're talking all about, what happened on the field, but what happened in the stands was just as important to us.
Yeah, by the way, I learned a lot about that, too, that the left field bleacher bums and the right field bleacher bums didn't really get along.
Well, there was a rivalry, and you have to choose. It's like choosing a political party. You don't really know why you made the choice, but then you're completely stuck with that choice for the rest of your life. And you'd sit out there, and we'd chant, right field sucks. And we hated the people in right field. And Joe Mantegna wrote a play she used to show every year on PBS called The Bleacher Bums, which was all set in the bleachers. It was clearly the right field bleachers. You could just tell. And at the end of his life, Bill Veeck went and watched a bunch of games from Wrigley Field. He was sitting in the left field bleachers. I mean, there are reasons for all this. It wasn't just a random thing. I don't think it exists as much anymore because it's harder to get in and you sit wherever you can get a seat. But back then you really had some freedom because it was, about a third empty.
Okay, we'll talk heartbreak now. I'll take my year first, and then your year. 69 was my year, and I can still name Ron Santo, Kessinger, Beckert, Banks, Hundley, Kenny Holtzman, Fergie Jenkins. I couldn't name as many guys on the current team. They had a 9-game lead going into September. And to make it worse, I was just starting prep school in Connecticut where everybody was a Mets fan. What happened?
Well, first of all, that team was truly a great team when you look at it. It's mind-boggling that they didn't win because they have several guys on that team. Many of them were in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. And every one of them had been an all-star at some point. There's a big argument about what happened. Ernie Banks, who I interviewed at the end of his life, told me that it was this game in New York where they sort of fell apart and the center fielder made a bunch of errors and Ron Santo who was the captain, attacked his own center fielder in the press. And according to Banks, he really was not nice about Santo. He said the team stopped being a team at that point, which, wasn't so important right then, but it became important when the whole thing tightened up in September. So that's what he said. If you look at how many games Cubs pitchers, how many innings they pitched compared to the Mets, Leo DeRocher overworked them. Yeah. Hundley, I think, caught like 158 games in that afternoon sun. And and the year before he'd caught like 160, which is a record. No one catches that many games. So he kind of drove his team into the ground. The question is that because that's just the kind of guy DeRocher was, or is it because they weren't deep? Like the team now has got a lot of depth, and that team didn't have a lot of people on the bench. So, there's that, and then there's, the curse. And there's the black cat, and there's all the stuff that happened. But the fact is that down the stretch, they just collapsed. And there's a million different reasons for it, but the first Cubs game I went to was in 76. And I was probably first aware of them like 74, 75. And it was weird because if you look at those rosters, that's the ruin of that 69 team. I didn't know it. I always likened myself growing up then to like somebody growing up like outside of Rome, like in the Dark Ages. Like, I didn't realize I was surrounded by the ruins of a once majestic culture. Like, I would be digging in the garden and come up with, like, a head of Marcus Aurelius or something. I'm like, what is this? Because you still, Banks retired. He was still around. Yeah. Santo was still around. Santo got traded to the White Sox. You know that, right?
Yes.
You know who he was traded for?
I don't. Who?
Steve Stone.
Oh, yes, and you tell a great story, by the way, that, he was a diabetic, that he hit a home run when he was seeing 3 pitchers because he was about to go into a diabetic coma. By the way, I got to tell you about Ernie Banks, too, quickly. This is the kind of guy he was. I was at a Pro-Am golf tournament at our club in Lake Forest, and I'm walking next to Ernie. He starts asking me, and I just graduated from business school at Dartmouth. He starts asking me about that, asking if we can do business together, all to make me feel good. And he's the friggin' guy that's the celebrity. Tell us now, as we get down to the last few minutes, what was the 2016 World Series? What are the key moments to you?
Of the actual series itself?
Of anything, the ethos, the culture, what are your takeaways? And one is surprising to me was that you almost felt alone at the end, and that now the Cubs weren't going to be different.
Yeah. Well, for me, a big moment, which was actually in the LCS, which told you what the Cubs were like. I mean, the NLCS was when I was sitting there in the press box, auxiliary press box at Wrigley, and Javier Baez stole home. I've never seen a person steal home plate. And that was just him, and he's the most exciting player in baseball, I think. So that, and then I think that when the Cubs, at the end of Game 7, when the Indians tied the game, I honestly said to the guy next to me, I put it in the book, I said, well, at least we're still ahead. And he said, no, it's tied. And I go, no, it's not. I mean, like, my brain wouldn't accept what had just happened. Yes. And I looked at the scoreboard. I'm like, the scoreboard's broken. It says it's tied. He's like, it is tied, you idiot. You know, and then when the Cubs came back, and I called my wife, and she said, and I said, does this mean there was no curse? She goes, did you see what just happened? Are we watching the same game? I've never seen better evidence of a curse in my life. What you're seeing is how good you have to be to overcome a curse. It's like this team has the flu, and like they almost got out of bed, and now they're back on their ass again trying to get back up, and finally they did overcome it, but it was like all these things kept happening, going down 3-1, you know, when they suddenly stopped hitting, and then suddenly when they lost control of that game, and then Madden's crazy moves with the pitchers, taking out pitchers who were cruising and putting in other guys, and Chapman giving up the home run. The whole thing was like, I mean, of course, that's how it had to end. The drought had to end with the greatest game in baseball history, and that's what it was. And when I was going home from that game, my attitude was not only I don't want to be at a party, I want to be alone in a room and just process what happened. And my first thought is now they should just end pro baseball, disband the major leagues. It's reached its proper ending. The Cubs went into the wilderness 170 years ago. They just crossed the Jordan River. They're back in the promised land. It's over.
Thanks to Rich Cohen. That was a great interview. The book is The Chicago Cubs Story of a Curse. He'll be in my hometown, in fact, at Lake Forest College on October 3rd. Locally, he'll be at Ridgefield Library. What day is that? Do you know, Rich?
It's October 26th, 7 p.m., and I'll be handing out Cubs ice cream cones.
Okay.
You can look it up.
You've been listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Our final national segment will be with Darryl Strawberry on addiction. And now, with no further comment needed, the final out of the 2016 World Series, ending at 108 years of curse.
Here's the 0-1. This is going to be a tough play. The Cubs win the World Series! Brian makes the play! It's over! And the Cubs have finally won it all!
Go Cubs, go! Go Cubs, go! Hey Chicago, what do you say? The Cubs are gonna win today. It's a man! Go Cubs, go! Go Cubs, go! Hey Chicago, what do you say? The Cubs are gonna win today. Go Cubs, go! Go Cubs, go! Hey Chicago, what do you say? The Cubs are gonna win today. Go Cubs, go!
I never had a problem hitting. I had a problem living. That's Darryl Strawberry, our guest. He was a power-hitting outfielder with a big, smooth swing. A star of the 1986 World Series New York Mets. He also played for the Dodgers, San Francisco Giants, and the Yankees. He hit 335 home runs and exactly 1,000 RBIs over a 17-year career, was en route to Cooperstown and the Baseball Hall of Fame when his career was derailed by substance abuse problems. His new book, not just a baseball book, and it's written with addiction experts, Don't Give Up on Me, Shedding Light on Addiction. Welcome, Darryl. Honor to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning.
And as I told Ron Darling once when I interviewed him, the 86 Mets were one of the last times that I was in love with baseball. Once the steroid era came, I lost a little bit of interest. So thanks for all the action then. And congratulations, if I got it right from your book, you've been sober for 12 years?
14. They kind of misprinted that, but that's okay.
14. That's even better. And this is not this is not a baseball book. Tell us briefly to start off what your purpose is here.
Well, the whole purpose is our group that came together, myself and the doctors and John Picciano, who's the CEO for Oglethorpe and the Darryl Strawberry Recovery Centers, and Ron Dock, who is certified addiction counselor. We work together helping people, and Ron brought me together with this group a couple of years ago. They wanted to do treatment centers, and just from my story and Ron's story, who worked with the Yankees and he was a counselor for like 16 years, we just thought it was time to write this book with the epidemic that's going on across America with opiates and heroin addiction. There's so many young people losing their life because of no education on addiction. I think what has happened is prescription drugs have entered into their lives, and it's destroying them. And we're just really trying to bring about awareness and educating. The stigma on addiction has been people are weak, and it's not. It's a disease, an illness of the mind, and if we can get back into the schools and educate people, I've been reaching out to the president, Trump, to try to get on his team program to really educate people so he can allow us to get back into schools and help some of these young people to avoid the pitfalls like I did and many others.
Doing great work. We're going to dive into that coming right up. Let me ask you, do you think 100% you'd be a Hall of Famer without the drugs?
Oh, no question. I mean, I think, I was already active drinking when I was young, 13, 14 years old, and smoking marijuana, which a lot of kids end up in marijuana maintenance and think there's nothing wrong with it. But eventually it stops working, and then you lead to other things. When you're broken inside and you're never healed inside, because of the fact that my father was an alcoholic and used to beat the crap out of me and said I'd never amount to nothing, and I go on to be a baseball player. But like I tell people all the time, it was my pain that led me to my greatness, and it was my greatness that would end up leading me to my destructive behavior. Of course, I was a baseball player, but it never allowed me to be a man because of the hurting inside and never dealt with that part. And I'm like everybody else. I just cover it up. My feelings were covered up with alcohol, drugs, and just to escape from the fact of who am I.
The one other question related to potential. Should the 86 Mets have won more World Series if the team hadn't sort of, moved too close to the edge of partying, et cetera?
Well, of course. There's no question about it. We're a great group of guys. I love all those guys. We're wonderful to play with. What we did coming into New York and turning that franchise into a winner was incredible. Davey Johnson, Frank Cashin, the general manager. They built the team, and we had everything we needed to have. I just think our lifestyles was just a little bit way out of control from time to time. And I think if we'd have slowed down and got some rest at night, we would have probably ended up being more successful and winning more championships. Of course, we lost in '88. We should have won that year, but we lost to the Dodgers, and they go on to beat the Oakland A's in that series in the championship.
Yeah, and in fact, I sometimes wonder if that edge that gave you the swagger was the same edge on the negative side, so whether you would have won without that edge. But let me ask you this, because I heard this years ago when the problems emerged, and Frank Cashin, who built the team, said that he felt, and the Mets felt a little guilty, that they had stolen your youth, and he was referring to Dwight Gooden and yourself, by putting you under the pressure so early in your lives. What do you think of that?
Frank Cashin was a remarkable person and an incredible man who had great wisdom and insight, and he really didn't want us to be in the big leagues at that young age. He didn't want me to come up at 21, and he didn't want Dwight to come up at 19. He felt like we needed to be more seasoned as a person down in the minor leagues to grow into who we are and everything, because he just didn't feel like we had that growth just yet of becoming a man, especially playing in a place like New York and then being under the spotlights. And he always was cautious about that, because I think he remember a young player like Tim Leary had got hurt and hurt his arm. He was a phenomenal pitcher, and he never recovered from it. And I think Frank was a little worried and concerned about myself and Dwight coming to New York and having to stand and play under that kind of pressure. I don't think he was never concerned about our baseball ability. I think he was concerned about more of our life and how would we live, how would we handle being in a place like New York City.
Tells you what a great guy he was. He wasn't just looking to exploit your talent. All right, tell us the book, Don't Give Up on Me. Tell us what you mean exactly by that.
Well, it means don't give up on anyone just because they have a substance abuse problem. Something's wrong, some trauma, some brokenness inside has happened to a person, to allow a person to go so far and escape and get down into the depths of addiction. Addiction is an illness of the mind. Anything that alters the mind is going to make you ill, and you just don't know what results are going to turn out in a person's life. And if it wasn't for my wife, Tracy, and Ron Doc, people like that were there for me, that never gave up on me, even through the hard times. It was some really hard times, and mine was public. And it was some really hard times that I had to overcome things to be able to get back on the other side of life. But they didn't give up on me, and that's the importance of family. Don't give up on your loved ones. You could love them, right where they're at, but you don't have to tolerate it, but just don't give up on them. Just keep believing that their life can change, they can recover. Somebody can help them, somebody can educate them about addiction, and they can get up on the other side of it.
And it also refers to your mother always believing in you, right?
My mother, yeah, always believing in me that I would do something great and mighty, different than baseball. I see most people think, well, it was baseball. You know, baseball was just a platform, but it wasn't my life. And my mother always believed that I was going to have an impact, a global impact on people's lives. She said she always believed that God was going to use me mightily to do something different to help other people. And I'm just grateful, and I'm grateful for, like I said, my wife, Tracy, who never gave up on me, who was one that helped me turn my life around and find my purpose in life.
Let me ask you this. In the book, it refers to addiction as a runaway train, and people feel it's shame to get help. And recently, Craig Carton related to gambling. How hard and how important is it to ask for help to stop the train?
It's very hard because we're people of pride. We don't want people to think we're weak or anything like that. But it's not a weakness, and that's what people don't understand. Addiction is very powerful in all areas: gambling, sex, porn, drugs, alcohol. It's real, and it's really necessary for one to get help and to be able to go through some serious counseling for a long time, not a short time, but for a long time, to get the mind well again, because the mind has to heal, and it will heal if we allow ourselves not to pick up and not to use. It's just a process that you have to go through, and it's a struggle. It's not an overnight miracle. I think too many people think, well, they should be well, or why are you taking drugs? Why are celebrities taking drugs and they have all this money? Money don't make you happy. Money just make you buy stuff and live comfortable, but it's not going to make you happy. It's not the answer to what's going on inside you. And we all look great on the outside, but what about the inside? What has happened in your life to make you not like yourself or dislike yourself? And I see it so much with what we're dealing with today, and that's why so many kids are dying, because they don't like themselves. I've sat with them in treatment center, and they just said, I really don't like my life. I started smoking marijuana at the age of 13, 14, just like you, and I went from that to pills, and went from that to heroin, and just rather have drugs, to not feel. So we just need to be able to encourage people. What's important is to truly love someone, because their life matters.
And, in fact, we'll talk now about that constant emotional pain, because I'm sure people will be surprised at the self-hatred you had. You thought you were ugly. And it's not really the bright lights in Bright City, is it, that brought you down? It's a troubled youth, and you refer to the monster. Tell us a little bit about the abusive nature of growing up. Well,
the abuse was real. It was physically. It was, my father was alcoholic, and then he was abusive of beating. That's all he really knew. And made you take off your shirt and lay across the bed and beat you with an extension cord, and you just didn't understand that, and you felt like, well, I'm not worth anything. He didn't love me. He never saw me play Little League or anything, and never gave me a hug or said, great game or anything, and that hurts. I mean, that's rejection is so real, and I think so many people feel rejected by loved ones because of something that's happened in their life, and we don't know what happened to people's life. Abuse is real. When I sat in my treatment center and sit with young girls and talk to them, and they've been molested by uncles and stepfathers and stuff like that, that's real stuff. Those are scars. Those are real scars that's left in people. And if they didn't never deal with them, of course they're going to use to cover up the pain that they're in.
You talk about this need for emotional relief. It's up and down. How did you finally get to peace?
Well, you have to have a spiritual awakening in your life. And I think what's happened in our society more than anything, faith has been removed from what's important. Faith in God and kids, and educating kids that God is love to them, and being able to have faith to believe something different and something greater than yourself has been removed. So I think finding that has made such a joy and a relief inside of me, but has brought happiness and peace within inside of myself, where I no longer have a desire to have all these other things, all these worldly things that make me feel good. I think people get so consumed with so much worldly stuff, and they think they're happy, but they're really not. Because I had everything, and I wasn't really happy. I had plenty of money. I had homes, cars. I still was never happy. I wasn't happy until I found faith and found peace within inside of myself. and found out, I was created for something greater than just what people believed I was as a baseball player.
How important were mentors to you? I know you mentioned Keith Hernandez on the team, but but mentors overall.
They're good. I mean, they're important. Being able to have when I saw Gary Carter, and, Keith was a good mentor as a player, but when I saw Gary Carter as a player, as a man, I wanted what he had, because that was incredible. Because he was a man of faith, loved God, loved his family. He never wavered. He didn't live a wild life. He respected us. He loved us. He didn't judge none of us. But he just never lived a life outside of what was important, and that's what life should be all about. I mean, I get to experience that today. I'm just so grateful, to be able to have a teammate like that I saw that knew that you can live a different way, because a lot of times you don't think you can live a different way because you're at the highest level of playing professional sports and this is the way it is. Well, that's not true. I mean, there is life after baseball.
And we're talking with Darryl Strawberry, of course, the Mets baseball star, and he's got a book with experts on the problems of addictions. Do you need to hit bottom? It's pretty amazing. I think people will find that at the bottom you were found behind a dumpster, covered in filth and almost wanting to die.
Yeah, it's a bottom. If you continue to use, that's what it has to be. A bottom has to come. If your bottom never come, you may die. I mean, when you look at all the celebrities that have died through overdose, it's because they never hit a bottom and they just kept going and they believed they were okay. And the last one was Prince. He didn't have to die the way he did. I'm taking opiates, you don't have to die like that. You can recover. So yeah, my bottom was behind dumpsters, and my bottom was in drug houses and shooting dope and smoking crack, and my wife Tracy pulling me out. Those were some bottoms where I just could never imagine myself going, but that's where addiction will take you. It will take you to a place and it will drown you.
Amazing honesty and forthrightness here, to your credit. And one of the things that I got, it hit me, is 8-time All-Star, 4-time World Championship, millions of dollars, and yet it sounded almost like you found most freedom and to love yourself when you were in prison with nothing.
Yeah, when I found myself with nothing, those are places where when I started to find myself at the emptiness of life with nothing, those were probably the best moments of my life, because I didn't have to really deal with people anymore. Because when you don't have the stuff no more and don't have the money no more, everybody's gone. So, yeah, they're only there when the ride is good. And, now that I live a different life and my ride is different, and I'm in ministry, I'm evangelist and travel and preach all over the world. People don't want to be around that. They want to be around the old me, but he no longer lives. He's dead.
There's a new
part of himself.
A new Darryl Strawberry. Tell us now, what are the Darryl Strawberry Recovery Centers and your current mission on that?
Well, it's a residential 28-day program, and we'd like for them to be longer. If we have to keep them longer, we keep them longer to help people understand substance abuse and help people understand that their life matters and bring about corrections. People got to be willing to go there and do the work, and that's what I try to tell them. I've had so many kids in and out of our treatment center, and so many that OD'd because I kept telling them, if you don't do the work, you will die. This is not a game. Drugs will kill you. And I think a lot of times we don't think the reality of I'm going to be the one, and for the grace of God, there go I. I should be dead, but here it is. I get a chance to spare and save some lives now. And that's the mission. That's the urgency of waking up every day, is to help someone else that's still suffering.
And you feel at the end that this is all much more important than the fact that you were one of the greatest baseball players ever.
Yeah, this is more important. Baseball is a game. I can tell you what's going to happen. Somebody's going to win. Somebody's going to lose. Somebody's going to win the championship. Somebody's going to lose it. And in life, you only get one shot at this. And we need to try to help people make the best shot of it, regardless of their condition. God loves them, and it's important that we love them too, and we make sure that they know that they are loved and they're not a mistake. Their life is important. So that's the mission of waking up every day. sheddinglightonaddiction.com is the website that we have. So I just recommend that parents pick up this book, because you never know when your child is going to make their own decision and get a prescription. Because if he does, I tell them, don't allow your child to get a prescription, please. when I speak. Don't, because once they get one, it's going to alter their mind. It's going to be a different kid. Let them take Tylenol like we used to back in the days, and tell them to lay down. The pain will go away, but take a Tylenol or ibuprofen something until you feel better.
And you talk about your mother never giving up on me. I think somehow she's looking down, very proud of you. Tremendous work you're doing. The book is Don't Give Up on Me, Shedding Light on Addiction, and it's out October 16th, but you can pre-order it now at Amazon and places like that. You can go to strawberrycenter.com to learn more about the recovery centers and strawberryministries.org for Darryl's website. Darryl, thanks for giving us a few minutes, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much for taking time out.